Hello, everyone. You are listening to the C Squared podcast with Corey and Curtis. Today, we are back with the illustrious Kevin Stewart-Panko. Yes, illustrious. And we are going to be discussing gateway bands, gateway metal, what's getting people into the scene right now, and what makes it awesome or not. So first of all, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast again today.
Oh, yeah. Thanks for having me back, and good to sort of see you again. At least see your name on the Zoom group thing or whatever.
So Kevin, to kick things off, so as a beginning starting point, so we're going to be talking about gateway metal. So like these are bands that are normally it's used as a slur nowadays. Like we briefly talked about this before we started recording, but you know, you got bands like Black Veil Brides, Motionless in White, all these type of things. And people kind of use them as a slur. And I just kind of want to get as a starting point, like, what is your kind of thoughts behind these kind of bands that are kind of getting people into metal, but, you know, most metalheads seem to enjoy poking fun at, if that makes sense.
Well, first of all, I mean, most metalheads will poke fun at anything that they don't like. So, I mean, so, and that's just kind of like the hard truth of that. You know, you'll have, I mean, I used to be pretty bad at it. Like, I wouldn't say elitism, but I would say that, you know, if there was probably a spell in the 90s where if I ran into a friend or somebody who was listening to post, what was it? What was that Slayer album? God Hates Us All, the one that came out on 9/11?
Yeah, that was 2001, I think.
If people are listening to Slayer like post 9/11, post God, I used to probably rip on them pretty hard, but you know, it all comes down to taste, I guess. And I don't necessarily, I can't really say, I can't really look down on somebody for the fact that they choose, you know, if that's what's introducing them to whatever is considered alternative lifestyles anymore, or alternative music anymore, or whatever. I'm not really super familiar with a lot of these bands. But at the same time, I mean, from what I've seen, a lot of them kind of seem to be mimicking a lot of, like, you know, what Motley Crue was doing in the early 80s and what, you know, a lot of those bands are doing before the Sunset Strip got really, really sugary and saccharine, and basically before the big label money came into it. And, you know, admittedly, you know, as much as I'm known as thrasher, death metal, grindcore, or whatever guy, I think that's the stuff I remember listening to a lot when I was a kid before I discovered the heavier stuff. So, I mean, I guess it's like a parallel path, and I can't, you know, I'm not going to shit on somebody because, like I said when we were talking earlier, I can't shit on somebody because they weren't born with a long sleeve Slayer shirt on. So, yeah.
Or
I don't know. I'm interested because, I mean, because you came up with the topic and because you guys seem to have this in mind, I'm interested to sort of more to know what your thoughts are on it, because I didn't even know that this was a real big issue or a thing.
Totally.
So yeah, well, if it is totally, man, maybe, I don't know, maybe I'm more interested in hearing what you have to say about it and why it is such a thing.
So for me, my whole thing is, I think the kind of elitist attitude, the elitists in general are probably the like biggest posers in the industry or in the fan base.
Okay.
It just like, it grates on me because, like you said, none of us came out of the womb wearing a long sleeve Slayer shirt. None of us came out of the womb screeching the lyrics to Hammer Smash Face. It just didn't happen. We've all got our stories of where we started. And, you know, some people, they don't continue to dig once they've, you know, they found the mainstream heavy stuff, like, you know, your Five Finger Death Punch, your Metallica nowadays, Motionless in White, the things that are really popular but still kind of heavy. And that's fine. I don't think that there's anything wrong with that. Personally, I think that these gateway bands are not just important but essential to the survival of our genre, because while there will be people who never dig beyond those mainstream bands, there will also be people that do. And when people get this elitist attitude of, oh, you listen to Black Veil Brides, that's not real metal, all that does is take fans and money and whatever away from those bands that those people would have discovered if not for said toxic fan base.
I agree. One thing I want to add to that is that I also think that a lot of times the people that are making those kind of accusations about the gateway bands and the posers and the elitists and shit like that, like you were saying, Corey, I'm willing to bet that most of them probably got in through something silly as well, like new metal or like Black Veil Brides or whatever you said too. They're just being idiots right now.
If they're my age, they were listening to Linkin Park. They were listening to Slipknot. They were listening to Korn. It does not matter what they say. They can sit there and try and lie and say, like, there's two kinds of people my age that exist. Those that say they listened to new metal in the late 90s, early 2000s, and freaking liars.
I agree. What are your thoughts? What are your thoughts on that, Kevin?
I think there are two types of people in the world. Those who like Journey and fucking liars.
Oh, exactly. Seriously, if you don't love Journey, just like what is, are you even human? I love Journey. I love Journey so much. Okay, I'm going to go off on a little bit of a tangent here.
Oh God.
Right.
So I don't know.
Journey, I want to hear it.
have you both? I know Curtis hasn't, but have you seen Stranger Things, Kevin?
I haven't watched the new season yet, but I have watched up to the new season.
Okay, so mild spoiler alert, put your fingers in your ears if you haven't seen it, but I'm sure you've seen the memes and the talk going around about the use of music in this most recent season that like it saves people from the bad guy.
I've heard of like the whole Kate Bush thing and then Master of Puppets or whatever. I haven't seen any of it, but I've heard about it.
Yeah, well, the idea is you know, music is actively saving these people's lives. And I was thinking like, okay, I've got to save a person from the big bad in this show, but I don't know their musical tastes. What would I play? The answer is going to be Don't Stop Believin' by Journey, because you are guaranteed to like strike a chord with pretty much anyone with that song.
I agree.
That's my rant.
I agree to the point where I just yesterday, I believe. Wait, Tuesday? What's today? Today's Thursday?
Today's Thursday.
Just for the sake of accuracy, Tuesday, I spent a ridiculous amount of money buying 2 tickets to see Journey in March. So there you go.
So see, yeah. And that's honestly, that's another gateway band. That's something that my parents listened to, like Judas Priest. A lot of the things that people say are not real metal, like the standards of what makes real metal today, the legendary bands of the 70s and the 80s would not meet those standards. So it's like, how can you say that these brutal vocals and it has to be tuned down so low and the drums have to be this furious for it to be real metal when you've got Judas Priest standing over here with none of that, who is definitely real metal? Like, come on now.
Sorry, go on.
I was just going to say, I actually heard someone say Metallica was a gateway band yesterday, which to me kind of blew my mind, because back in the 80s, they were like extreme of extreme, right? So anyways, just a side comment.
If you think about it, but yeah, I mean, that makes perfect sense though, because if you think about the phases of Metallica's career, it's like, okay, underground band up until the Black Album. Black Album is like what the biggest, one of the biggest albums in the history of music.
Something like that.
So, you know, that's a completely...
Would you consider them an underground band until the Black Album? Because didn't Master of Puppets go gold within like the first few months?
That's a good point.
I mean, okay, yeah, I guess in the sense of like, you know, mainstream radio, video play, whatever, I guess you could say they were underground up until Justice, maybe, whatever.
Well, they had no videos till Justice.
The Black Album blew things out into the stratosphere. So
yeah,
basically you have an entirely different group of people discovering that band at that time. And I think I might have said this before. I know I've said this before. I don't know if I've told you guys this before, but I mean, it doesn't happen as much these days, but up until like a few years ago, I would still encounter people who didn't even really know Metallica had 4 albums before the Black Album. So there's there are 2 different worlds out there. And if somebody's discovering Metallica through the Black Album or Load or that hideous Lou Reed thing they did or whatever that was, you know, whatever, like that's like, it's kind of like going backwards. And here's a funny example actually from last night. Okay, sorry, a couple months ago, a friend of mine bought me an Exorcist t-shirt. Exorcist the movie.
Mhm.
And it's been kind of sitting here since he gave it to me, because I had never watched The Exorcist. I mean, I kind of know all about it and all like the sort of tropes and the head spinning and your mother sucks cocks and hell and all that stuff. But I'd never actually
That's all
seen
you
the
really need
movie
to know,
back
right?
to front.
Exactly.
So I watched it last night for the first time, and the one thing that I discovered in that movie that I never realized before was like how many metal references have been taken from that movie. Like vulgar display of power is a line from the movie. Reagan, what's her name, says something about the cunting daughters, which is obviously a line from one of the Slayer songs, and one off of South of Heaven. Just like all these metal references that I never knew existed because I'd never seen the movie up until last night. And if I'm a poser for that, then whatever. But now I can confidently wear an Exorcist shirt without being like, oh, I've never seen the movie. I'm just wearing the shirt because it looks cool.
That's amazing. So where are we going here? You guys
Honestly, I
both gone
think
on
this is just
tangents.
an episode that's a rant at this point of
Could be.
how much I hate elitists and the whole poser thing. Like I said, I think elitists are the ultimate posers because they're the only ones trying to limit the success of this genre. Like I often bring up the point of, oh, this is metal, where the biggest sign of failure is success.
Yep.
And yeah, I honestly think that more than religious groups, more than people's parents, more than whatever, it's the elitist attitude that is doing the most harm to the genre. So it's like, how can you call someone a poser for liking a specific heavy band rather than the heavy band you like?
Right. And you also need to look at it like from a creative standpoint, regardless of what you think of any of those bands that you mentioned that consider them or are considered gateway bands. None of those bands, I hope, didn't come together with the idea of being, we're going to be a gateway band for bands that are heavier than us.
Yeah,
that's what we want to do. I mean, it's like they formed their band to do whatever, to get out whatever's in their head, whatever they do musically, however they want to distill their influences, blah 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 blah. And that's what came out, and that's what some segment of the population is going to enjoy and cotton onto. Other segments of the population aren't. And if it doesn't speak to you, then why
listen to it?
Why bother keep yelling at it? Because it's not speaking to you, because they're not listening to you anyway.
Exactly. Like sitting there and complaining about the existence of Five Finger Death Punch is not going to make them go away. Just like go listen to something else. It's pretty simple.
I mean, some of those bands do some pretty, I'm not going to focus on particular names, but some of the stuff I've heard about and seen in person in terms of backing vocal tracks and is this person really playing their instrument, blah 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 blah. Some of that stuff's pretty shady, but I mean, in terms of like the raw music on a record of a CD or however you consume your music, if it gets you off, however it gets you off, and regardless of how it was created and how many guest songwriters there are and how many people are playing the solo because the guitar player couldn't actually play it himself, or how much of it is edited together, whatever you're hearing, if that, if it clicks with you, then it clicks with you. And I don't know, I can't police this shit because I just don't care.
Well, let's bring up one other thing here, just as since we're talking about gateway bands, just want to get both of your opinions on the current band that is everybody's, either loves or hate, Ghost. Let's talk about Ghost for a few minutes, because I'd call them gateway. Wouldn't you guys both call them gateway?
I mean, I guess. I mean, the funny thing about Ghost is that it's I don't really know what Ghost has been up to in the last like 4 years.
Fair.
But I remember, when I remember seeing them play Maryland Death Fest, put it that way. Like that's kind of like Ghost's roots as far as I'm concerned. And I know dude used to be in whatever Swedish death metal bands and all that kind of stuff.
Yep.
But I've also heard that a friend of mine was telling me, who lives in Pennsylvania, he was telling me that he was driving from Philly to somewhere out in the sticks to see like one of those, how the, you know, how 70s and 80s bands will like tour in the summertime and do like whatever amphitheaters and all that kind of thing.
Yep.
Mhm.
He was driving out to like somewhere in the middle of nowhere to see, I can't remember who it was, but somebody who was big in the 70s. And he was saying like rock radio in the States, like Ghost is on like in the middle of the day. And
Oh, I didn't know
I
that.
can't, like, I don't, that doesn't make sense to me from what, you know, from the band I saw at Maryland Death Fest, like in whatever year, to like now being played on mainstream FM radio in the US in the middle of like, you know, God's country or whatever. So, I mean, hey, well, I don't know what they sound like these days, but more power to them for taking advantage of the shtick. And I also think that I've always made this joke that if you take a metal, some kind of metal content and give it a pseudonym and put a hood on it, people are going to come out in droves and and start like and just fall over themselves to check out what it is, either because of the mystery involved or because whatever reason, the Halloween aspect, I don't know. But you know, think about it. It's like when we all thought Venom were Kronos, Mantis, and Abaddon, and
Mhm.
we all thought that or like the guy from Midnight, who's, you know, who's just some dude from Cleveland, but it's like, you know, he's got this executioner's hood. And when we all thought like Tom Warrior's real last name was Warrior when we were kids, it's like, fuck, there was like this certain mystique to it. And I guess that amplifies the attraction, I guess, in the same way that, like, you know, horror movies and clown shows and fun houses and all that kind of stuff. You know, I don't know.
What's your thoughts on Ghost, Corey?
I honestly, I really like Ghost. I do consider them a gateway band in the same way that I consider like Joan Jett or someone like that, that's more of the mainstream rock type danceable variety. Like they're going to get people into something that's a little bit heavier. Yes, it's still kind of on the pop side, but it's got a little bit of bite to it. It's familiar enough that people can be comfortable listening to it, but it does have a little bit of intrigue where people might be inspired to start digging into something a little bit heavier. You never know, but if they don't, that's also fine. I also like their spooky aesthetic. I think it's
Mhm.
fun. I think they're a fun band, and I don't think that there's anything particularly wrong with that.
Fair.
There's nothing wrong with being danceable.
Are they
No.
danceable now? Because I remember they were more like a doom metal band when they started.
Oh, they're very danceable now.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Fair
They're-
enough.
They still have the same sound, but they're got a little bit more of the pop sensibilities, I would say,
Like
nowadays.
70s, like funky rock and groove type thing, or like dance.
Not dance,
No,
no.
not like dance,
No.
like more the 70s style.
Okay,
But then
okay.
again, it kind of brings it back to that, whole point of, well, that's not real metal. Well, if it sounds like something from the 70s that was considered metal in the 70s, then why is this not real metal?
That's a good point, actually, because like a lot of the bands from the 70s nowadays wouldn't be called metal. Like
No, they wouldn't.
Blue-
Black Sabbath wouldn't be considered real
Nope.
metal by
Neither
today's
would-
standards of brutality.
nope, neither would Deep Purple or Blue Oyster Cult or any of those.
No.
So, Kevin, do you have a comment on that before we move forward?
On the 70s thing?
Yeah, the 70s thing.
I mean, I think the funny thing is that at the time, even like, you know, when you read accounts from back in the day, or even if you just read biographies of those guys now, it's like they all kind of, the only band I should say who really sort of jumped on liking being called heavy metal was Iron Maiden.
Yeah.
A lot of them were like pretty much like, no, we're not a heavy metal band at all. We're just a hard rock band, or we're like a whatever band. And they kind of, a lot of them really didn't like being referred to as heavy metal. So,
Oh, hi,
Mm.
Motorhead.
well, okay, yeah, Motorhead. That's a different. Sorry, Motorhead and Maiden, I guess. But I mean, you know, you think about Rush and Zeppelin, and
Yep.
none of those bands, they all fucking hated being referred to as heavy metal.
Yep. Yep. 100%. So now moving a little bit forward on this here. So Kevin, let's get your opinion on the how it would be, or how you think that a gateway band should be. Actually, I'm phrasing that the wrong way. So what do you think would be an actual gateway band that you think would please people that have been in metal for a bit, but also be accessible enough? Like, who would be an example of that you can think of?
Sorry, say that again.
I think I think I said that convoluted. What I'm trying to say is, what do you think is a good example of a band that you think would fit the definition of gateway metal while still being something that people that have been around a while that are into metal would like?
I guess it depends on the actual gateway. Like,
Fair.
look at it this way. So, I mean, the number of people that to this day I still run into who discovered Cannibal Corpse through the Ace Ventura movie is fucking astronomical.
That's me.
Crazy.
Yeah,
But
it's insane.
that's an insane jump to go from some guy or a girl who's sitting at home who, like, you know, watching a movie, or, you know, Ace Ventura comes on TV or whatever, who've never really experienced death metal before, to have Hammer Smash Face the first thing that they experience from the world of death metal, and to sort of like, okay, this seems interesting, I'm going to jump in it from this point. Like, that's kind of like almost going to like climbing to the top of the, what do you call it, the 10-meter platform, but it's skipping the 3-meter springboard. You know what I mean? Like, like, but most gateway stories involve, like, you know, little incremental moves. So I guess it depends on, you know, your discovery, and also it depends on the individual. Like, people who are constantly looking for more extreme stuff in all facets of their life might sort of, you know, make those jumps quicker. I can't really say, like, you know, what would be a band that would stand out as a link between the mainstream and the underworld, or whatever you want to call it. But yeah, no, I don't have anything for you. But what I do find interesting is that interesting and kind of tragic, is that when you have a band that sort of becomes that bridge, and they become popular because of it, whether or not, you know, they might not have gotten any better or worse, or they might have stayed the same, but just based on the fact that they've brought new people who aren't quote unquote lifers to the scene or whatever, that band starts getting a lot of shit from the elitists as well. And it's sort of like, well, it's almost like the same thing. It's like they didn't ask for that. It just kind of happened. And how can you hold them responsible for being that band that, for whatever reason, hundreds of people have gravitated towards? And, you know, it's better for the band. I don't know why it's such a big deal to people who are doing the same thing that these newer fans are doing. You're still buying records, you're still streaming, you're still going to shows, you're still buying shirts. Just because you did it like 2 years before somebody else, that makes it better and they're wrong. Like, that's bullshit, dude.
I agree. Corey, you discovered death metal through Ace Ventura?
Yeah.
Really?
There you go.
Yeah, I discovered metal in general. I think I've told this story before. My aunt gave me a bag of hand-me-down clothes, and in the bottom of the bag was a copy of British Steel on tape, and that's how I discovered heavy metal in general. But death metal, it was Hammer Smash Face in Ace Ventura. And I definitely agree with Kevin on the whole, like, it's like I said earlier, metal, where the biggest sign of failure is success, at least to the elitist fans, where it's, you know, a band becomes successful, and obviously then you've got to just completely shit on that band. Like, now I'm seeing people just completely try to shred Lorna Shore because they've reached such a height, which is absolutely insane for a deathcore band. Honestly, seeing them that mainstream for what they are is just mind-boggling. But now I'm seeing the elitists come out. Oh, they're not even really that heavy. It's like, oh my God, shut up.
Sorry, what? Lorna Shore are popular, like, mainstream? What do you?
They've become quite popular.
Yep.
Really?
Yes. No, I wouldn't call them like freaking Adele or Lady Gaga type mainstream, but I mean, they're, for what they are, they have almost 700,000 listeners on Spotify right now, which is for what they are is a huge milestone for a deathcore band. For a band that heavy, reaching that many people is like, holy shit.
Yep.
That's fucking crazy. I remember a tour in 2015 or 16, maybe, I don't know, somewhere around there, the mid tens. So it was Deicide headlining, Entombed AD, Hate Eternal, Black Crown Initiate, and Lorna Shore opening.
Nice.
And man, it was not a pretty sight. Put it that way. That tour was a not very populated tour, put it that.
Well, I just got back, or not just, but I just went to the Chaos and Carnage tour with headlined by Carnifex and Suicide Silence, and Lorna Shore was the direct support for the double headliners. And the audience went just absolutely ape shit. I mean, the level of bruises I had from that show, I have literally left a permanent mark on my behind because the bruise was so deep. It was absolutely insane. And then the audience like cleared out for Carnifex and Suicide Silence. It was like half. It was weird.
Oh,
yeah.
Yep. But one point I wanted to make, hey, Kevin, do you remember? Because maybe I'm forgetting something, but back in the 90s, like nowadays it would seem kind of like I think people would be making fun of the fact that if a band appeared on like Beavis and Butthead, for example. But unless I'm mistaken, like that was something back then where it was like a point of pride to be featured in Beavis and Butthead. Because I mean, Morbid Angel was put on there, Sepultura was put in there. Am I correct in that, or do you remember?
Sorry, correct in what? That those bands were on there, or those bands were,
that it was like a point of pride and that it wasn't like looked down upon that, the band had appeared in a cartoon. But I mean, nowadays, I think it would be.
I think at the very beginning of it, before people realized that, before Beavis and Butthead became like a cultural sort of signpost or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
That the early bands that ended up getting on the show somehow looked down on it at first.
Yeah.
And I think once they realized that, this is really popular with people and it's actually drawing people out to shows and drawing or, getting people interested in buying records and all that kind of stuff. It's like, it wasn't such a big deal, but I think that it took that popularity for a lot of people to come around. And I think now it's a huge point of pride. People still talk about that shit today about how, being on Beavis and Butthead was one of the best things that happened for us at the time and blah, 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 blah. And I mean, admittedly, I didn't even have MTV growing up.
You had Much Music.
Yeah, but did they have?
Yeah, that's how I saw Beavis and Butthead. Okay. Much Music. Yeah. Okay.
All I remember is that watching an episode of Beavis and Butthead, maybe I did see it, or maybe it was a tape of it. I don't know. Anyway, that's how I discovered Crowbar.
Yeah.
The first Crowbar song I ever heard was on Beavis and Butthead, and I just remember them just ripping on the fact that they were such huge dudes. Yeah. And I was like, oh, Crowbar. And then, because of the business we're in, like a couple of days later, the promo shows up at my house or whatever, but that's fine. But that's how I remember that's how I first discovered Crowbar, was through Beavis and Butthead.
I think that's how I discovered Morbid Angel, if I'm not mistaken. But anyways, we're running.
And this was actually going to lead into my point of the question you asked Kevin earlier of what band would be like the best gateway. I don't think it's necessarily a band, that it's soundtracks. Because I can tell you how many freaking soundtracks got me into certain the Mortal Kombat soundtrack. Yep. I was like, what was I? I was 6 when that came out. And Mortal Kombat soundtrack, Ace Ventura, Resident Evil, Queen of the Damned, like as you just keep going up until about like 2002, when I think soundtracks kind of hit their peak. That is an amazing gateway for people. And just, I wish we'd bring back the metal soundtrack.
Mortal Kombat, was it?
Or had Fear Factory on it, had Typo Negative on it.
Okay, and I'm gonna out some people here now, but
Mother's Day Out, which is one of my favorite underground bands.
I think it was okay. I'm gonna out some people. It was either Resident Evil or Mortal Kombat, one of the two. But the dudes from Blood Incantation, I don't know if they'll appreciate me telling anybody this, but I remember them all like just going, like being in a van with them and them putting it on. We found it at a used record store somewhere, and they put it on, and they were just reminiscing about being teenagers and discovering metal via whatever one of those two movies they were talking about. And to me, being like, 15 years older than those guys, it was kind of like, this is a different experience. And it's like interesting to hear how their experience was different from mine and stuff, and what sort of drew them in. But for a band like that, who was kind of like, one of the bigger names in underground death metal these days, it's like, well, there you go. they weren't born wearing long sleeve whatever shirts either. So
None
Yeah,
of us were.
They do need to bring back the soundtracks more because, I mean, it doesn't really happen anymore, but I discovered a lot of bands from soundtracks back in the 90s and early 2000s. Like, you're right, Corey, 100%.
Oh, The Crow. There's
Yep.
another excellent one. My Life
Yep.
with the Thrill Kill Cult. That
Yep.
freaking the club scene where he just like decimates everybody. That's
Yep.
epic.
Yep. There's so many good soundtracks. Last Action Hero, there was Wayne's World, just too many to frickin' name.
Judgment Night, man. Come on.
Yeah, Judgment Night. How could I forget about that? That was like the first basically new metal album. Ooh, but anyways. Kevin, did you have anything else you wanted to add to that?
To that
The last point,
particular thing?
soundtracks.
No, I don't know. I mean, I also remember on a lighter note, I remember the singles soundtrack being a big thing with
Yep.
a lot of people I knew back in the day before like grunge really took off.
Yep.
Yeah, that was a thing with a couple people I knew back then.
Yep.
who were discovering like the Lollapalooza side of alternative / heavy music.
Yep. Yep.
So, anyway,
Yep.
it works all around, I guess.
Yeah, 100%. Corey, is there anything else we want to bring up on this topic? We're already 35 minutes in, so we should probably wrap up pretty quick.
No, I mean, boiling it down to elitism is dumb. Like
Yep.
what you like, listen to what you want to listen to. And if anybody gives you shit for what you're listening to, in the words of the late great Lemmy, fuck them.
Agreed. Okay, Kevin, do you have any final words before we end off?
Never forget that there are two types of people in the world.
Those that like or that say
Journey.
they like Journey and
Those-
fucking liars.
Amazing. All right, with that, thank you very much, Kevin, for coming on, and party on, Corey.
Party on, Curtis.